Welcome to Understand All. I'm your host, Aslakir Gerleif. Today, we're embarking on a thrilling journey back to 1962, to the heart-pounding events of the Cuban Missile Crisis. So, buckle up, and let's dive into this gripping tale of brinkmanship and diplomacy that brought the world to the precipice of nuclear annihilation. Imagine waking up one morning to discover that nuclear missiles, capable of wiping out entire cities, are stationed just 90 miles from your doorstep. That was the terrifying reality for millions of Americans in October 1962. The world held its breath as the United States and the Soviet Union engaged in a tense standoff that would forever be etched in the annals of history. But how did we get to this point? The seeds of the crisis were sown in the aftermath of the Cuban Revolution, which saw Fidel Castro rise to power in 1959. As U.S.-Cuba relations deteriorated, Castro sought closer ties with the Soviet Union, setting the stage for a geopolitical showdown. The United States, determined to oust Castro, launched the ill-fated Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961. The fiasco only pushed Cuba further into the Soviet orbit, with Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev seeing an opportunity to gain a strategic foothold in America's backyard. Khrushchev made the fateful decision to deploy nuclear missiles to Cuba, a move that would bring the world to the brink of catastrophe. The crisis reached a boiling point on October 14, 1962, when a U.S. U-2 spy plane captured photographic evidence of Soviet missile sites under construction in Cuba. President John F. Kennedy was informed 2 days later, and the Executive Committee of the National Security Council, known as ExComm, was swiftly formed to navigate the crisis. Kennedy faced an agonizing decision. Should he order an airstrike to destroy the missile sites, risking Soviet retaliation and potentially triggering a nuclear war? Or should he opt for a naval blockade, a quarantine of Cuba, to prevent further Soviet shipments of military equipment? The stakes couldn't have been higher. On October 22nd, Kennedy addressed the nation in a televised speech that would become a defining moment of his presidency. With a somber tone, he revealed the presence of Soviet missiles in Cuba and announced the imposition of a naval blockade. But behind the scenes, Kennedy was also secretly preparing for a possible invasion of the island. As the world teetered on the edge of the abyss, the U.S. military was placed on DEFCON 2, the highest state of readiness short of actual war. According to the U.S. Department of Defense, this was the only time in history that the U.S. reached this level of alert. The gravity of the situation was underscored by the fact that the Soviet Union had deployed a staggering 158 nuclear warheads to Cuba, as reported by the National Security Archive. But the danger wasn't limited to the missile sites on land. Lurking beneath the waves were 4 Soviet submarines, each armed with nuclear torpedoes. As the U.S. Navy attempted to force the subs to surface, a series of miscommunications and misunderstandings nearly led to a catastrophic nuclear launch. With tensions at a fever pitch, the crisis reached its climax on October 27th, a day that would come to be known as Black Saturday. An American U-2 spy plane was shot down over Cuba, killing pilot Rudolph Anderson. The U.S. military prepared for retaliatory strikes, pushing the world even closer to the brink. But even as the specter of nuclear war loomed large, behind-the-scenes diplomacy offered a glimmer of hope. ExComm convened no less than 43 times over the course of the 13-day crisis, according to the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum. Kennedy and his advisors grappled with the agonizing decision of whether to strike Cuba or pursue a diplomatic solution. Meanwhile, secret communications between Washington and Moscow intensified. Soviet Premier Khrushchev sent a series of letters to Kennedy, first offering to remove the missiles in exchange for a U.S. pledge not to invade Cuba, and later demanding the removal of American Jupiter missiles from Turkey. With the fate of the world hanging in the balance, Kennedy displayed remarkable restraint and strategic thinking. He chose to ignore Khrushchev's second letter and respond positively to the first. In a televised address on October 28th, Khrushchev announced that the Soviet Union would dismantle and remove the missiles from Cuba. The crisis was finally over, but its impact would reverberate for decades to come. The Cuban Missile Crisis served as a chilling reminder of the dangers of nuclear brinkmanship and the importance of diplomacy in averting catastrophe. In the aftermath of the crisis, the United States and the Soviet Union established the Moscow-Washington hotline, a direct communication link between the two superpowers designed to prevent misunderstandings and miscalculations in times of crisis. The near miss also spurred efforts toward arms control, leading to the signing of the Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty in 1963. But perhaps the most enduring legacy of the Cuban Missile Crisis is the lessons it holds for our own time. In an era of renewed geopolitical tensions and the ever-present threat of nuclear proliferation, the crisis serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of peace and the necessity of dialogue and diplomacy. As we reflect on those 13 fateful days in October 1962, we are reminded of the incredible courage and wisdom displayed by the leaders who pulled the world back from the brink. The Cuban Missile Crisis stands as a testament to the power of reason and the triumph of diplomacy over the forces of destruction. So, what can we take away from this gripping chapter in history? The Cuban Missile Crisis teaches us that even in the darkest of times, there is always a path to peace. It reminds us that the choices we make in moments of crisis can have profound consequences for generations to come. As we navigate the complex geopolitical landscape of the 21st century, let us draw inspiration from the example set by Kennedy, Khrushchev, and the countless unsung heroes who worked tirelessly to avert catastrophe. Let us embrace the power of diplomacy, communication, and mutual understanding as we strive to build a world free from the shadow of nuclear war. The Cuban Missile Crisis may have faded into the pages of history, but its lessons remain as vital and relevant as ever. It is up to us to heed those lessons, to champion the cause of peace, and to ensure that the world never again comes so perilously close to the unthinkable. And that concludes our deep dive into the Cuban Missile Crisis. I hope this journey has not only informed you, but also inspired you to reflect on the importance of diplomacy and the fragility of peace in our world. Remember, the choices we make today have the power to shape the course of history. So let us choose wisely, and let us never forget the lessons of those 13 fateful days in October 1962. Until next time, this is Aslakir Gerleif, reminding you to stay curious, stay informed, and never stop seeking to understand the world around you. Thank you for listening to Understand All.